we need to start making more conscious material choices.
Set up an initiative called Make Fashion Circular.
It's a tsunami of change.
Welcome to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's DIF, an interactive online event series that aims to shift mindsets and inspire action around the circular economy. My name is Seb and I'll be your host for the next 45 minutes, and we're going to split this show into two parts. Later on we're going to be hearing from attendees of a recent Linear to Circular workshop, and they're going to be talking a little bit about their personal experiences of that workshop and the circular economy. But first, we often talk about trying to emulate nature. But how hard is that to literally do? Well, I'm actually very privileged to be joined in the first part of the show by Joaquin Ruiz and John Adams, Director and Deputy Director of Biosphere 2, where they've done exactly that in the Arizona desert. But first, I want to remind you that we want your engagement, we want your questions and comments and feedback. So make sure that you're doing that either via the comments section on the website that you're watching this on, or in the comments section on YouTube, or by joining the conversation using hashtag ThinkDiff on social media. So get those questions in. We want to challenge Joaquin and John as much as possible. But first, Joaquin, I want to start with you. The starting point of this Biosphere 2 story is kind of a slightly sort of sci-fi, wacky 1980s experiment where there was this design to put people under this dome-like structure that we've created, was created in the 1980s, and for them to live there uninterfered with for 2 years. Can you just set the context for what that was all about?
Well, let me just say it would be the best example of think diff. So basically, there were these folks. They included some very distinguished scientists. As I said yesterday at the event, they were three free thinkers. I mean, really people that thought very differently about how we could do things in a way that had not done before. And what they did for a few years is that they used to have these meetings around the world in which they would think about how the ocean operated and how the deserts operated and how all this stuff worked together to make the Earth what it is today, or what it has been for billions of years. And after doing that for many years, they decided that it was too difficult to understand the Earth as we know it just by observing the Earth and analyzing the Earth, because the variables are too complex. So they decided to build this thing called Biosphere 2, Biosphere 1 being the Earth, that in principle would control itself just like the Earth does. So there would be no need to bring in mass or take out mass, but only energy. And that the ecology of the system would control the atmosphere of the system, just like the Earth does. And when they were finished with this thing, they also decided to put people in it. And the idea would be that if you want to live in another planet, you need to have something like Biosphere 2 or something like the space station, something that controls itself. And they just went out to build it. So the engineering is extraordinary. They invented the frame that is so beautiful. The whole thing is sealed with stainless steel. I mean, this is like 3 football fields, and there's stainless steel underneath it. So
how large is it?
Well, he knows the numbers way better than I do.
So the structure's 1.27 hectares in size, or a little over 3 acres is the footprint. Its tallest point is about 28 meters. That's the rainforest. And so from a volume perspective, it's hard to put it in context, but if you think about it in the sense that it's about 84 Olympic-sized pools, as sort of the volume inside. But they, as Joaquin mentioned, they achieved a remarkable seal and engineering feat. It only loses 10% of that volume when it was originally designed to the outside atmosphere. So that's more tightly sealed than like the International Space Station. So they could trace where every molecule would go and how that molecule interacted with others in the system, which was really unique.
And of course, the experiment of sticking a group of people inside there for a period of time didn't really work.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. But let me just say that that the biosphere really also, in addition to trying to represent nature, is a representation of what you want to do with a circular economy, right? Because everything in there, you start with a point, and everything was recycled. So they were going to grow food and then use whatever was left over from the food to compost the rest of it. The water was being recycled. Everything was being recycled. The air was being recycled. No air was being pumped in there. So it was a remarkable sort of ideas and remarkable feat of engineering. But a few things did not work, even though these people put a lot of money and a lot of energy into the creation of the biosphere. In those days, they didn't understand how soils worked very well. We actually don't understand how most things work very well in nature. We don't really understand why it rains in detail. So the soils, they didn't understand the soils, and they sucked up all the oxygen. So the oxygen concentration in the atmosphere was low. The CO2 was all whacked out. Anyway, all the gases in the atmosphere were wrong. And these folks also had a hard time growing food. So they could have the minerals that they needed, but they didn't have the calories that they needed. So then all these folks, there were 8 people in there, and John knows way more about this because he's been at Biosphere longer, so you may want to just talk about what happened then.
Yeah, no, so, we look at these different social experiments, whether they're ones that have been done by the major space agencies around the world, and the biggest challenge they have is how do you assemble a team? And how do you get that team to work together? And what they had hoped with Biosphere is that most of these teams, when we think about NASA or the Chinese or the Russian space agencies, they're typically in a really sort of small, confined space. They built Biosphere as large as they did to hopefully offset those very well-documented social and psychological challenges. And one of the Biosphereans told me that the only thing that the size of the facility did was delay the onset of those very typical, very well-documented social and psychological challenges by about 6 months. So the group couldn't get along. There was big debates on how things should be done or should not be done. As Joaquin had mentioned, oxygen got down. So oxygen outside is 21%. It dropped down to about 14.2%. So there was a medical doctor who was part of a team who his cognitive abilities started to be impaired. And they ultimately had to make a decision that they needed to add oxygen in for the safety of the folks. And also, although they produced quite a bit of food, from a calorie standpoint, it just wasn't enough for all 8 of them. So you're having to work really hard, you don't have a lot of oxygen, you can't get along with your folks, and you're not getting the nutritional needs that you require on a daily basis.
Makes some people quite grumpy.
Well, it made them really grumpy. That's the point of it. And so it was a real challenge. But it was an incredible feat. No one had ever done anything like this. I mean, we think about big science initiatives. Right here in Europe, you look at the Hadron Collider, multinational, many different disciplines get together. What are the fundamental building blocks? Conversely, the University of Arizona is really well known for building the largest, most sophisticated telescope mirrors. We deploy them into space on the remote mountaintops, so we're trying to look to the ends of the universe. We've never created an equivalent tool to understand Earth systems. And as much as we romanticize about traveling into space, that's a really long ways away for us. And so it's here on Earth that we need to understand those systems and how our resources are going to be impacted. And Biosphere is one tool that gives us greater insight into that.
I love that you earlier referred to, I guess, someone who works at Biosphere as a bioseverian or something. Yes, that's great. So there's five different climates under this structure. Right. Can you just remind me very quickly what the 5 are? There's a rainforest, an ocean, a desert.
Yep. So what we've got, so originally it was set up, so on the northern end of the structure, the tallest point, you have a system was modeled after an equatorial rainforest, mostly species from in South America. And then you have a coral reef, a Caribbean reef environment, a subtropical savanna. Working your way further south, we actually have a mangrove system. So all 3 species of mangroves that you'd find in North America, red, black, and white mangroves, are included in this. And then on the far end, you have what we call a coastal fog desert. So if you were to travel from the southern part of the U.S. down into Mexico, on the Baja Peninsula, the type of vegetation that you would encounter is represented here. And then the last space was an area that they set up exclusively for agricultural practices.
Great. So, and actually, how are those areas like sort of separated in some way? How do you create such It's one thing to create an environment that under a dome structure and a sealed steel structure that's like the Earth. There's another thing to create 5.
Right. Well, again, the systems that they chose were all, if you sort of generally think about their climate, they're sort of tropical or subtropical in nature. So there's a little bit of overlap and spillover. So there didn't have to be exact delineation. But also what you can see underneath is this sort of large system that supports the facility itself. And they refer to that as a technosphere. So it still requires quite a bit of mechanical devices to be able to support. So to be able to create rain, control the temperature, to move water and air around the system, there is still a significant mechanical component. It's those systems that help to allow us to create a rainforest or an ocean or a savanna or a marsh or a desert.
So when just to make it clear, when the thing was with the biospheres in there, it was in fact everything was open.
Yeah.
But right now, the experiments that we've put partitions. So the ocean is partitioned from the rainforest, and so on. So you can do that kind of stuff with a facility. You can either partition it or you can have it open, and it depends on the kinds of experiments that you're interested in doing.
And that kind of leads us on to the next phase of this story, that the 1980s wacky experiment may have failed, but obviously you're here with us today, so Biosphere is still open, and Biosphere 2 is still open and alive. And actually we've had a question in from Kelly that kind of speaks to this. You've told us some of the things that failed, but what did work really well, and what's the facility used now?
Yeah, and let me step in here. So the word failure, I think, it has really strong connotation, and we think experimentally about sort of major milestones that have happened scientifically. Oftentimes those milestones come out of situations that were not anticipated or go against the hypothesis that was originally done, and so you could almost consider those to be failure. And so Biosphere, even though that experiment didn't happen as they had planned it, there was a tremendous amount learned from that system. And so that in and of itself, the creation of a one-of-a-kind Earth and environmental science laboratory like what we have with the facility is a remarkable achievement. And it's sort of their maiden voyage. We don't always get it right the first go-around, but it's remarkable that they got it done. So that was a big one. But I think we've done some remarkable experiments inside the facility. I'll touch on one with the rainforest, and I'll let Joaquin talk about the ocean one. But we know that the tropics are getting warmer and drier. We also think of them as a big sink for carbon dioxide we continue to see increasing in the Earth's atmosphere. But there's real questions as to how much can those systems absorb. So there were some models that folks had put out and said that today we're at 411 parts per million, and that when we reach carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and once we reach a certain amount, these systems are going to saturate. And that amount that this model predicted was 600. So something we're going to reach in maybe 50 years, 60 years. So how do you test that? So you can't just put a dome over the tropics, whether you're in Africa or in South America. But here at Biosphere, you did that. And so we can help with model validation and calibration. So we subjected our system to those that the model laid out, and we were able to show that what our system and how it behaved matched that of the model. It's saturated at 600 parts per million, which means rainforests do a great job at absorbing carbon up to a point, and then after that they saturate. That sponge cannot hold anymore.
So the point being that the benefits that those systems are offering us right now, there's a limit.
Yes.
And we now have a scientific hypothesis, demonstrated it within Biosphere 2 of what that limit is.
That's correct.
Well, one of the scariest things about global climate change is that the physiology of plants changes not only because of the temperature changes, but because of the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. So the nutritional value, so the people that argue that global climate change isn't all that bad because CO2 is like a fertilizer. I mean, that's actually the word that they use, a fertilizer. So things will grow greener and happier and whatnot. And what John is saying is that that's only true for a point. But even before you get to that point, the nutritional value, for example, of rice drops by 25% in their protein value. So all this world that lives mostly on rice will get way less value of what they're eating as global climate change progresses. And the temperature changes are such A few years ago, there was a terrible amount of corn that came out of the Midwestern U.S. because it was a really hot time. And it didn't matter how much water that we're putting on the plants just could not actually operate very well. So the crop was a failure. So the temperature is a big deal, CO2 is a big deal for all kinds of reasons, including nutritional value of what you're eating. So, but going back to the other experiment, which probably is the most famous, just because oceans are sexy and corals are sexy, is in the 1900s.
I've not heard that before, that oceans and corals are sexy. But yeah.
It's true, it's true. And they're very beautiful, actually. But in the 90s, there was when the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere was around 360 parts per million, an experiment was done at the Biosphere to increase it to 400. And at 400 parts per million, we killed the corals inside the ocean in the Biosphere. Right now, we're a little bit about 400 ppm, and the corals are taking a beating around the world. And we showed that that CO2 was sufficient to do it. But now they're even showing that the small variances in temperatures in the oceans are even worse than the CO2 variances, which drop the CO2 which drop the pH of the ocean. So the predictive value of what we can do at the Biosphere is a big deal. But I'd also like to point out that in addition to what we can do inside of the Biosphere is a think tank of things that we can do outside. And we have very strong programs on the relationship of energy, food, and water. And we have programs I mentioned yesterday in Mexico City now in trying to make the city more sustainable and through circular economy in the food. So there are various programs that we have in there that have to do with food, which aren't even done at the moment inside of the Biosphere. They're done.
I was going to ask a little bit about that, because I guess it's great to know that, it's helpful to know that we get to a certain CO2 level in the atmosphere and these are the effects.
Yeah.
I was wondering how has that been turned into action? I guess that's a big challenge of all kind of climate change related research, but are you working with organisations or individuals or how can that be translated into sort of some of the changes to avoid those effects that are demonstrated with the domes?
Yeah, it's a really big challenge, but we do try to bring resiliency to various places. Sadly, global climate change is a thing of social injustice. It's going to beat up on people that are poor more than the wealthy people, and it's going to beat up on places that are already deserts. So we have programs in partnership with Israel and in particular, actually, and these folks in southern Israel in the Negev desert have figured out how to grow plants out of rocks and salty water. It's the most incredible thing. So we have a lot of programs that we're bringing the best practices around the world. In northern Mexico, in the native lands of Arizona, where it's horrible. There's no water anymore. So yes, we do that throughout the world. But there's a variety of things that people have to think about deeply. One of them, and one of the reasons that the circular economy is so important to me, is that it's going to take a long time to ameliorate what's happening with global climate change. Because even if we stopped the production of CO2 on its tracks right now, the amount of CO2 doesn't disappear, right? So there's probably going to have to be some kind of engineering to suck CO2 out of the atmosphere if this whole place doesn't turn into a mess.
Which I guess is easier to do at Biosphere 2 than it is in the real Biosphere.
That's true. That's exactly right.
We're almost out of time. I always like to finish with a forward-looking question. What's next for you guys and the project?
Well, a lot of folks have looked at Biosphere and really referred to it as being ahead of its time. And today, with the new research faculty, these younger research faculty that are coming into the field, they're really continuing to push Biosphere 2 into new directions. We've got really exciting projects taking shape in the rainforest, in our ocean system. We've constructed a massive experiment that looks at the fate of water in semi-arid environments. And it rains in the mountains, how much ends up downstream for you and I to use, and what impacts the quality. So we're continuing to repurpose and push the limits of biosphere because, given today's political and economic climates, I think it's unlikely we're going to see the type of investment we saw with this facility into the future, unfortunately. So, this is a great opportunity to continue to repurpose it as new questions, as these new ideas, new questions, and new challenges we're faced with, and using Biosphere 2 in part to help solve them.
And I just want one very quick question from me, just because it's something I'm personally interested in, and I'm the host, so I get to hog the mic a bit. The question of soil and how little we know about that, and we often talk in the world of food that it all comes back down to soil, really. Is that something that's being explored at Biosphere 2? Are we learning more about it?
Yeah. We're in the era of the microbiome. And everybody talks about the microbiome in your stomach and your microbiome and how that changes the way you live. Including some mental issues now come from microbiome. Well, the same thing the same thing in soils. The microbiome is now becoming so important. Depending on the microbiome of soils, you can grow things better or worse. So there's an enormous amount of research of what controls the microbiome of the soils, and that's the kind of stuff we're doing at Biosphere.
Fantastic. And people can visit the facility, is that right?
And you're welcome.
Fantastic.
Bring the cameras.
If you want to come to Arizona or you're in the area, then it is possible to see this incredible feat of engineering and for yourself.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much, John and Joaquin, for your time today and for sharing what is an incredible story with us. And thank you everyone who was posting the questions. We are going to move on now. Before we are joined by the Linear to Circular workshop people I mentioned earlier, we're going to hear from Ken Webster, one of the leading sort of thinkers around circular economy. And in this video clip, he's going to be talking about why young people especially are looking for a new story about the circular economy.
So he said, Stephen Fry, the actor, the comic, and the commentator. So here we are, blind as moles, engaged in ugly, unappealing struggles of identity politics, nationhood, and others such fatuous, outmoded notions, while the planet on which we depend for life is gasping for air, and a technological threatens to engulf us and redefine us without our consent. I think his sense there is that so much is happening so quickly that the economy doesn't seem to be holding the center. We always relied in the post-war era on an economy that would deliver full employment, that would deliver continuous growth, that would, if we worked on it, would be able to design out waste and things of that nature, so that it would get better and better. But the great financial crash in 2008 and the shift in politics since 2016 tells us that the fundamentals of the economy are struggling, because the political discussions, and it is an election day in America today, the discussion around the politics is really saying that the economy isn't working for an awful lot of people.
Well, the story that you'll hear Donald tell a slightly different story, that the economy is doing fine.
Yeah, but
Is that just that's the politics?
Well, that's partly the politics, and if we're talking about full-time employment, no. There are plenty of jobs, but they're often low-wage jobs. They're in the precariat, the gig economy, many of them people working 2 or 3 jobs. There's a big split going on between those who have regular employment and those who don't. There's a big split going on between the financial economy and the economy of production and consumption. There's pressures coming in from all over the place, whether it's to do with environmental resources, whether it's to do with growing inequality. There is an uncomfortableness about what the economy is delivering, and I think that's being picked. That comes through in these politics. People are not, in general, happy. They don't see themselves getting better off year after year, and so the story of people in the economy is a crucial one to look at, because we don't know what the story of the future is. We're making it up as we go along. This is why things like the DIF are really important.
So we don't know what the story of the future is. That was Ken Webster talking at last year's DIF in November at the live launch. But some people may have some influence on the story of the future along with me in the studio now. Asan, Patricia and Estefania, I hope I got all your names right. Welcome to this session. And we've decided to use the opportunity of you guys being in London for the Foundation's Linear to Circular workshop, which I'm going to ask you to tell our viewers a little bit about in a moment, to get you in here to find out a bit about your experiences and especially what you've been doing over the last few days. So maybe some of you, actually what I would want to do is actually just 10 seconds. I want to know where you're from and what you're doing right now, whether that's studying or working on certain projects, just so the audience knows a little bit about you. So maybe if we go from Asan down the line, 10 seconds, where you're from and what's your story?
So I'm a Canadian native, currently studying environmental policy master's degree at the London School of Economics, doing my dissertation on plastics.
Great.
I'm Patricia. I'm from Spain and England, but grew up all over, and I'm the director of the board for the Circular Economy Club, and I currently work at Capgemini at the moment.
And Circular Economy Club is a group that brings, for anyone who doesn't know, brings together circular economy professionals around events and things like that.
Anyone really that's interested in the circular economy, whether it's from academia or just wants to get some knowledge, or from the private sector for government, it's just a platform for everyone to connect.
Great. And Estefania?
Yeah, I'm from Ecuador, and I'm studying a master's degree in management in polymer technologies. I'm a polymer materials engineer, so I'm based in Austria right now.
So we've got some materials experts in the room. So Asan, Linear to Circular workshop, what was that and what have you been doing the last couple of days?
So the Ellen MacArthur Foundation opened up an Emerging Leaders Development Program for young professionals and students. And so from all over the world, a call out went out and brought us together for a week full of workshops around circular economy principles, development practices. Lots of really interesting people came in and delivered presentations. And then we got to spend a full day at the summit yesterday, which was a really amazing experience.
What sort of things have you been doing, Patricia, when we say, people doing presentations, workshops? Can you give us some tangible examples of the types of things that you've been engaging with?
Yeah, sure. So we were kind of given the opportunity to have such a huge range of different aspects of it. One of the examples that I personally found quite interesting was the Materium, and having them come in and physically making bioplastics, which I would have never had that opportunity. Also, IDEO came in and showed us how to actually make like a framework with our projects that we're tasked to do and how to think of a solution for it. There was just such a range of speakers and interactions, and I think something that was really important was the fact that we were also able to contribute to the program and what we wanted to learn. So it came from all angles, really.
So it's quite a practical thing. I mean, sounds like, I assume making bioplastics involves some real work of some kind. What do you do? You're burning stuff, or how do you make bioplastics?
So the way that they described it was kind of like cooking.
Yes.
So they brought these kind of
But it's also
portable
not like cooking.
Well, no, you don't eat it. But they showed us this website where you can get they call it recipes, and you just kind of add in the different quantities and you boil it, and you then put it onto like a cellophane plastic, which is either dried out or dehydrated. So.
And Estefania, obviously this was a program that had people from all around the world involved. What's the value of, for someone like you who's obviously got a real interest in a specific part of the circular economy, maybe more broadly, to be able to connect with, I think there were 40 different individuals in this space for 3 days?
Yeah, this was an amazing opportunity. I mean, I'm based in Austria, so I get the chance to meet people from different nationalities. But the fact that we're here all engaged with one common topic, so we bring in people from engineers or science or, policy, and all these kind of different topics getting together and how to apply it and how to bring it to our own countries, basically, because we were some people from Mexico and from India and from Ecuador myself. So it's like, how can we apply the circular economy back in our own countries? So we got to learn a lot from the countries who are actually doing more, let's say. Yeah.
Why? What motivates? What was the motivating factor for you in terms of why you thought I'm gonna apply to be a part of this program? I understand it has other elements to it. It's not just the 3 days, but there's some pre-collaboration and content and maybe even something afterwards. But what's the key motivating factor for you to sign up?
I think there are two key motivations. First is about the plastics, there's such a big discussion about the plastics and packaging, but not only that. So this is my major. I'm a polymer materials engineer, so it makes sense. But also about Ecuador, an emerging economy. And South America, basically, we have so many natural resources that they are not really being exploited. So how can we do this? How we can use these resources to make something better, something good?
And Patricia, you're obviously deeply engaged with circular economy as a topic, given your current role. What inspired you about the idea? What motivates you to be so involved in it in the way that you are?
I think for me it's just an idea that makes sense, and I think it's something that brings together lots of different stakeholders, where a lot of different stakeholders can also gain an advantage from it. And I think it was one of the few concepts that I kind of came across during my master's that I was like, this could actually really work and this is really needed. And I think the interesting part of it is having so many different backgrounds. So for example, here we all have different backgrounds, and having it from so many different perspectives and from different nationalities. And I think it's something almost that's quite beautiful for everyone to come together and actually work on this issue that's so needed at the moment, because as everyone is aware of in this room, it's not going to go on the way it is at the moment. So it's really interesting to see different perspectives on that.
Hassan, sorry, we've had a question in from online. So this is probably the trickiest question we've had so far, but you look like you can handle it. They say it's one thing to explore the idea of a circular economy in a program like this. It's fun to have 3 days of workshops and talks and really engage with the idea collectively. It's another to take that idea and convince others, perhaps in a workplace or in your studies. But is that something that how would you approach that, or what? Do you now see yourself as sort of an advocate for the idea?
Yeah, for sure. And one thing that really came out of this the last couple of days is how diverse circular economy concepts are, and how they can interject all sorts of different parts of the economy and industries. So we talked about circular economy building design, plastics, food, textiles, right? So the idea behind circular economy, the stress being on the economy side, is there's components of circularity that can be brought into every sector, everything that we do within the current marketplace. And it's just a better way of doing things, right? So if there's profitability and resource efficiency gains, there's less waste that we can all do without. And it's something where you're working within the system to change it and make it more efficient. So I think it's an easier sell than a lot of other environmental principles like climate change, because there's a lot of politicization that happens, but circular economy is kind of this budding new space where you're working with the system and making it better. And I think there's way more promising components of it that can be directly applied.
Yeah, I think that's, obviously we've just had Joaquin and John on the sofa, and it strikes me that, I haven't spent a huge amount of time with you guys, but it strikes me that there's a kind of energy out of the circular economy as a kind of a solution or a direction that you don't necessarily get when you talk about the challenges of, coral reefs being killed off by the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. And that's very inspiring. Are there, I suppose the follow-up question to that is, maybe I could start with you on that, Estefania, is are there any challenges? What's the biggest challenge in terms of, for you, in terms of how you're going to take forward the circular economy, whether it's in your research or what you do after that?
Mm-hmm. So, as I said, there are two parts of the circular economy interested for me. One's for the industry and another one as an emerging economy. So the challenge would be, how do I really bring this concept to my country? It's basically unexplored, so it's such many things that could be improved, or how to convince the people who say, hey, we can change this in this way and it will be good for you to add economical value, but also in the environmental side of things. So that would be the main challenge, I would say.
And Patricia, maybe a similar question to you. Obviously, Circular Economy Club brings together lots of different people to talk about that. What do you find most difficult about the sort of pushing the idea out there?
Yeah, so I think it echoes a lot of what was just said. I think there's two areas of this. One is getting buy-in from stakeholders, whether it's from government or from a business point of view, just kind of getting them to understand what it is and explaining it in a language that is understandable. But I think on that point, it's how do we make sure that we're creating the right narratives that we want for the circular economy. In the workshops, we did discuss a lot of what actually could go wrong and what areas could maybe be more challenging. And I think being able to explore that at the workshops actually enables us to overcome those. So I think the narrative and getting buy-in for me at the moment, I think, are the two biggest challenges.
We had a great, I know you really enjoyed this particular session we had yesterday as part of the Foundation's Summit 2019 with Wolfgang Blau, who's head of Condé Nast International. So it was a session about what was the role of media in this story, and he talked a lot about stories. Just picking up a little bit on Patricia's point around narrative, how important does it feel like to get that story right to inspire the right kinds of actions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Wolfgang was great because he talked about how the role of media is to simplify the messages so that it could be portrayed to the average person. So, in terms of narrative, it's about conveying to people that jobs can be created with this, that things can be cheaper, that they could still have their cake and eat it too, in a sense, that you can continue to buy things and live well, but do so in a very responsible and sustainable way that doesn't degrade the planet or destroy the resources that we've got.
I suppose actually in many ways the easy to understand convey thing, yes, it's good for communicating for the average person, but I'm not an average person and I still like stuff to be as clear to me as possible to engage with it. We had a question in online from Andrea, and I think it could be a question any of you guys could pick up on, but what surprised you most when you started to learn about the circular economy? Anyone particularly want to jump in on that one? Go on, Patricia. Yeah. What surprised you most?
Sure. Firstly, I think what surprised me was how have I not heard about this before?
How recently did you hear about it?
So I learned about it during my master's, which was in 2015 and 2016, so relatively new. Ago, yeah. But since then, the conversation has definitely spiked. But yeah, I think that really surprised me. And I think what surprised me was that it was just, how can I put this? That it was just so intertwined. You start off thinking, okay, yeah, that, we can just put it back in the system. It doesn't sound as maybe difficult as it is. And then you go deeper and deeper and deeper, and you just are blown away with how many complexities, how the whole system really needs to change rather than just a product or a business model. It's really grasping the whole economy. And I think for me, that was one of the most surprising things and the most interesting, to be honest.
And what are the next? What's next for you, Anthony? I mean, it was obviously, I know that the Linear to Circular program had a pre-work component to it. Actually, can you tell us a little bit about? I realise I've mentioned that a couple of times, and I haven't actually made that at all clear to anyone watching this. Tell us just. So there's the workshop we've had this week, and there's a piece of work that you guys did before that workshop.
Yeah, so we have 6 weeks of collaborative work. We got together in teams, and we all have different topics. So one of the topics was for food, and my topic with my team, we were talking about a cosmetics company, so giving a solution for them on how to become more circular. So for the past 6 weeks, basically, we just got to talk to each other online and came up with a bunch of ideas on how we can implement this, not only on the packaging, there was a big focus on packaging, but also different way how we entice this business to tell them, hey, this is the way to go, it will be good for you. So we did that. Mm-hmm.
Great. And maybe a question for you, Hassan, because we've had another one in at Renard. It seems like the topic of how do you communicate the circular economy, how do you become an advocate for it is very popular with our audience. His question is, and I think I'm giving you quite a lot of the tough questions, is the concept too complex? And is that a barrier to adopting the circular economy?
Well, I guess the complexity, every challenge within the environmental sphere is complex because ecologically everything's interconnected. And that was also one of the things that came up over the course of the workshop is how do you build an inclusive circular economy future that doesn't leave anyone behind, and it's a very common thread. So technically, yes, it is complex. How do you create products and services that can be regenerated and turned into something? But these are big problems, and we've got big thinkers and big brains in the room and in the world. So we're continuously developing new solutions, and it's about getting people excited about those solutions, getting them on board, and continuing that process of innovation and development. A couple of decades ago, people couldn't think that you could economically generate solar energy, and that was a really complex challenge, but now it's on grid parity with a lot of fossil fuel production. So
that's great. In a moment, I'm going to ask you guys because obviously you guys have had the benefit of the last few days and of the program that preceded it, to give me the one thing that you've taken away that could be valuable for anyone watching this. So I want to give you a second just to think about that. But I just want to tell the audience that after this session at 1:30, we've got Bringing the Circular Economy to Life in Cities, and we've got a representative from Sao Paulo and a representative from London talking about how things are actually being applied across two of the world's largest cities in the circular economy. Both of those cities are very forward-thinking, and they're both part of the Foundation's recently launched food initiative. So that's something to look forward to at 1:30. But back to the guys. So maybe starting with you, Patricia, the one thing that you've maybe taken away from the last few days or the program that preceded it that you think is a powerful reflection that anyone watching this might benefit from?
Well, I think one of the most important things is just to be open-minded. I think a lot of us really knew what the concept was and had our standpoint on it, but I think by being able to listen to the same issues or the same ideas from a different perspective really makes you understand it just so much deeper. And I think I would just advise everyone just to, it's good to have opinions and to understand where you're coming from, but it's also really important to listen to other ones to feed into your conversation. So I think that's, I guess, for circular economy and for anything really. So that's what my takeaway is. I don't know if you're understanding the idea, but be open-minded to converse with other people who are engaging with it. I think it's great to have conflicting conversations as long as it's in a safe space and it's not in a way that's going to harm anyone, but just to understand and to really feel your ideas and your observations.
And Estelle, anything on the polymer front that has radically changed your perspective?
Well, I think I'm actually on the right path because I entered the polymer field thinking about sustainable development, and when I listened about circular economy, it made sense for me. So the thing that I would add extra would be that this concerns everyone. The discussion about circular economy and sustainable development. It doesn't matter if you're a teacher or if you're a student or if you own a restaurant or you're an engineer. This concerns absolutely everyone, and how can you add value and how can you make things better in basically your society and everything.
So a powerful sort of confirmation moment for you in terms of where you're pushing forward. Yeah. And I guess that echoes a little bit Hassan's point earlier about the applicability to it across so many different areas, sectors, contexts. Hassan, again, toughest to go last. One thing that you think you've taken away from this experience?
Yeah, so it was the Materium workshop that really drove home this fact that there's no such thing as waste. That I used to think that any organic material, you just turn it into fertilizer or compost, and that's the best thing you could do. But these guys at Materium, they're turning coffee grinds into cups, they're turning orange peels into makeup. So it just goes to show that as long as you can maintain the integrity of waste and maintain those nutrients within those forms, there's ways for you to upcycle and recycle a lot of the stuff that you think would be garbage and useless.
So there's no such thing as waste.
No such thing as waste. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for making the time to join me in this pop-up studio we've created. And thank you for sharing your experiences with our audience. This was session 2 of 5 today at the pop-up DIF on June 14th. I've already given a shout out for the session that's coming up next at 1:30, but I'd mention another one that seems especially relevant to what we've been talking about here, which is at 4 o'clock. We're going to talk about 4 ways to introduce the circular economy. So 4 different ways you can start talking about the topic. So definitely join us at 4 p.m. if you want to get some tips, or maybe you want to join in the conversation and tell us how you introduce the circular economy. So do keep watching today, and thank you so much for all your questions and comments. So use that hashtag ThinkDiff.
We need to start making more conscious material choices.
Set up an initiative called Make Fashion Circular.
It's a tsunami of shame.